primo ospite internazionale, un piccolo applauso per favore, grazie. Vi presenterà il suo lavoro, si presenterà da sola anche perché sa farlo meglio di come possa presentarla io. Poi noi abbiamo due modi per fare domande. Girerà una giara dove potete mettere dentro dei post-it con le domande, se siete un po' timidi, le chiediamo noi, altrimenti avremo due microfoni e ci vedrete girare e potete tranquillamente porre domande, anche in italiano nel caso li traduciamo noi per voi. Va bene? Mi raccomando, non siate timidi, eh? Allora, sono molto orgoglioso di presentare il primo ospite internazionale di IGDA Milano, SetJetters. Piccolo applauso, grazie.
Thank you so much. Buenos Aires, it's great to be here. Pardon for my English. My voice is still not 100%. I was sick right before this trip, and then of course, after I was sick, I took a 3.5-week trip of speaking at 4 different events. So it's still recovering, but I get to go home on Saturday for 2 whole weeks, home to Seattle, so your weather's basically has followed me. So you're actually getting the full Kate Edwards experience, because this is what I'm going home to. So what I was obviously what we were asked to do, or what I was asked to do, and thank you again for the IGD chapter for inviting me. I really appreciate that. It's been a while since I've spoken at an IGDA meetup. I used to obviously speak at many of them all over the world. But I'm going to talk a little bit about my work. I'm trying not to go too long. I just want to give you an example of essentially what I've been doing, because a lot of people, they know me because for running the International Game Developers Association for 5 years as the global executive director, and some people know me for running the Global Game Jam. And then when I tell them, well, I'm actually a geographer who's been doing culturalization work on games for 31 years, they're like, what? Huh? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So just to start off, when I ran the IGDA from 2012 to 2017, it was an interesting time in this industry. Obviously, we were still fighting a lot of issues around diversity and inclusivity in different markets, not only the US, but certain places in Europe and elsewhere, issues with crunch and work culture, not being as positive and helpful and supportive as it should be. And you might wonder, why did I even bother taking over the IGDA? Well, the reason is after I was at Microsoft for 13 years, I left the company with the desire to do this culturalization work, which I'll talk about, in video games. Because when I was doing the work at Microsoft, I was doing it across the entire company, not just on games. But when I got to work on the games, I found everything I love: creativity, games, technology, culture, all of that stuff came together in just the most perfect job I could ever have. So when I left in 2005, I said, you know what, I'm going to join the IGDA because I know that's where I can meet game developers and get to know, fellow developers a lot better. And so I actually restarted the IGDA Seattle chapter because it was kind of dead. And I know exactly what it's like to be a chapter leader. It's not easy. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of selfless effort to make this happen. And then the IGDA had no localization special interest group, so I decided to start the LocSig. Because the work that I do, it's not language translation, but it's, when I would go to GDC or Gamescom or events like that, I would tend to hang out with translators and the Loc people, because it's kind of close to what I do. And they just kept complaining how nobody cares about Loc, no one cares what we do, no one understands what we do, and I don't like whining. So that's like when people in Seattle were saying, we don't have a chapter anymore, oh, it's so bad, and I'm like, let's start it. So I started the localization special interest group so that we could bring the local community together with an IGDA and give them a focal point for their energy. And I said, one of our missions is to teach non-Loc people about what we do. So we collectively wrote a white paper, we held talks and webinars and all that stuff to educate people, what is Loc and how does that affect your game? Eventually, the board of directors of the global organization approached me and said, hey, you seem to be really active in this org. Would you have any interest in running the global organization? And I didn't, because at the time, I really was getting angry at the IGDA. I felt it kind of went off the track, because I'm like, this organization is focused on advocacy. It's about supporting developers and lifting up developers and making sure we support whatever their needs are. And so I kind of felt that it was kind of getting off that track and out of focus. So I did the interview with the board of directors, and I just like laid into them. I let them have it. I said, I had all these points, the things they're doing wrong, but I also had a solution for every single thing. And right after, basically, shortly after that interview, they're like, okay, you're hired. We want you to do this. So, so I took over the IGDA, and the interesting thing is it was a great experience for me. I traveled the world. I visited a lot of our communities around the world. It was just a pretty amazing thing, being able to, this was in Morocco here, we like to do, that's with the Minister of Communications in Tunisia, who, he actually owned a game company when he lived in the UK, so this guy was like totally pro games. He had this amazing vision, so that was one of my jobs, is interfacing with governments a lot and helping them understand what does it take to make a good game ecosystem in any given market. You know, we tried to do a lot of press over what we were doing, trying to push different initiatives. You know, Gamergate, which I'll talk about that in a minute. So we were trying to do a lot of things to kind of put the IGD back in a position that it's a leader, a thought leader in advocacy. We're trying to change the industry for the better. So, so that's what my focus was on. We did a tremendous amount of focus on diversity and inclusion while I was in the IGDA, because we said that obviously we used to have what was called the Quality of Life Survey, which kind of died out previous to my time. So I resurrected it and I called it the Developer Satisfaction Survey. So that's something that IGDA typically does every year, and we send it out all around the world to just get it like the pulse of the communities around the world and say, what are the most important issues to you? What are the struggles? And that became a benchmark for the number of people from different demographics in the industry. So that gets quoted a lot by different media sources, and that was my goal, is that they're going to be quoting the IGDA on this every year. And so, yeah, we did a lot of different things. Nintendo, that was a whole other issue. But then I also, right after I left the IGDA, I was asked by TakeThis.org, which is an organization focused on mental health in the game industry. They asked me to be on their board of directors. And then I'm still on their board of directors, but I spent a little bit of time as their executive director as well, when the original founder decided to take a break. And then of course I joined the Global Game Jam. And what a lot of people may not know is the Global Game Jam actually originated in the IGDA. So the Education Special Interest Group, they decided to create some kind of activity that would teach people how to make games. And so they came up with the Global Game Jam in 2008. The very first one was 2009, and then it's been happening ever since. And so when I took over the IGDA in 2012, the Global Game Jam had gotten so big that they decided to leave IGDA and become their own nonprofit. And so 2 years after I left running the IGDA, the Global Game Jam asked me, would you please run the Global Game Jam? And I said, I love the Global Game Jam. It's one of the coolest things. I'm like, absolutely. I will absolutely help out this organization. But it wasn't all fun and games. It was tough because I was running the IGDA during Gamergate. And as I was a woman leader in a kind of pretty visible role in this industry, you know, in the face of this misogyny campaign, I was one of the primary targets. And so for about 2 years, I got death threats and harassment every day. You know, woke up to Twitter, another death threat, more harassment, all of that kind of stuff. I was in touch with the FBI in the US on a regular basis to show them, here's what people are saying about me. You know, what am I supposed to do about this? Now the thing is, they actually said the IGA is their enemy because they felt that we were somehow orchestrating this big plan to control the gamers and their brains and like make them do things that you know, normally their masculinity would make them not do. It was absurd. But the crazy thing is that Gamergate, as we know now, it eventually evolved into what we call in the US the alt-right. And so when Trump got elected in 2016, the Gamergaters were celebrating, saying, our guy won. We won the culture war. It's a lot more complicated than that, obviously. But it was challenging. It was a challenging time. And I had to use my skills, my focus on culture. I treated the Gamergate people like another culture, because they were. And so I read everything they ever wrote about me on Reddit and 4chan and everything else, because I used myself as the subject of studying how do they think, and how are they looking at this, and where are they coming up with this crazy stuff. And that was my way of coping with this, is basically using myself as the subject, because I am a social scientist, that's my approach. And it was really helpful. So their threats, honestly, I just didn't care. It's just like I actually posted on Twitter, said, I'm going to be at these events where I will be speaking live. If you want to come have a face-to-face conversation with me, bring it. I'd love to have a conversation with you. But otherwise, I'm not going to argue on Twitter. It's a waste of time. You're just trying to, you just want to take screenshots of stuff I said, use it out of context. So anyway, that was not easy to do, go through Gamergate. But like I've told a lot of people, the feeling to me is that once you have 100 arrows in your back, you don't feel the rest of them. So you kind of become numb to this after a while. And plus you realize it's not about you. They're not attacking you. They're attacking the ideas that you're trying to promote, inclusion, diversity, things like that. And I also knew the thing that gave me confidence is that we are on the right side of history on these issues. I know we are. To me, it's not even an argument. So they can fight and kick and scream all they want against change, but change is happening. So the other thing that keeps me busy, other than IGDAs, I'm a huge geek. I don't think I included my cosplay pictures today. But when I travel about 75% of the year. One of the things I love to do is visit filming locations around the world. And so because of COVID, I wasn't traveling at all for 18 months. And so I got together with some people and I co-founded a company called SetJetters, which is a film tourism app that lets you find filming locations all around the world. And that's Vlad and I were there at the 40th anniversary of the filming of The Empire Strikes Back, back right as COVID was starting in 2020. And so that's called Han Solo Rock, because Han Solo's leaning on the rock. So, so I just geek out about that stuff. Anyway, the real point, shifting a little bit to the work I've actually been doing. The IGDA work, the Global Game Jam work, that's all the advocacy work that I've been focusing on beyond my day job. So typically when I would be running the IGDA or Global Game Jam or helping take this or whatever, my consulting work, my culturalization work was something I did as a hobby at night. So that's because I love it so much. So that's something I would just do at night, try and keep up with all the client requests. It wasn't easy. I didn't really have a life. It's like by day, I do the IGDA and all of that, which is really busy. And then at night, I do my culturalization work because I'm never going to stop. So over the 31 years that I've been working on games, my very first game was Flight Sim 5.0 in 1993 when I was working at Microsoft. And I've been basically exploring this interaction between what is real, which is all the real geography outside these walls, and then what is represented, so what do we actually put in our games, and then to me, one of the critical parts is how is that perceived by our players and the world around us? How are they going to perceive our world? And so, I'm originally from Los Angeles, as you can see there in the background, but actually that's Los Santos from Grand Theft Auto 5. They did an incredible job of replicating LA, mostly, with a few changes. So, these are some of the game franchises I've worked on. I had started, what is today? I started on Monday, my 287th game. I'm finishing up work on Indiana Jones and the Great Circle right now. There's like a lot of really last minute stuff I'm doing. Did a lot of stuff on Dragon Age Veilguard. My work on that concluded about a month and a half ago, and that's coming in hot. I think that comes out in like just a month, or no, less than a month now. Anyway, that's just some of the stuff I've worked on over the years. It tends to be a lot of AAA, but not entirely. I've done a ton of work for indies. I've done board games, I've done card games, I've done a lot of other things too. So culturalization, I throw that word out there. What does that actually mean? So when you're making a game world, whatever it is, fantasy world, real world, doesn't matter. My job is to see how is your game world compatible with the different local worldviews in different markets around the world. And so I kind of see it as this interesting gene splicing exercise to try and preserve your creative vision, because I don't want to affect that, but we may need to change a couple things to make sure it's compatible. Not always, because trust me, changing your game's a lot better, or a lot easier than changing the local culture. You're not going to do that. So, and so I work in this zone here, there it is, I work in this zone of where I'm looking at content assets, which are either compatible or incompatible with different markets around the world. It could be a character design, it could be an environment, it could be a symbol, it could be all kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of things we have to think about when we do culturalization. This is for every single decision we think about a lot of things. So for example, what's your values and goals? When I say company here, but it could be you personally, your goals as a creator. What do you stand for? What are you willing to change or not change? The context in which content is generating, meaning we're all biased, whether we like it or not, because we're from a specific geography, specific language, specific culture, but that's why we spend so much time in school, because we're trying to overcome our bias and kind of think outside our own heads. But sometimes in the creative process, that bias will creep in, and I've seen it happen many times. The business strategy for the vertical, so if you're like Microsoft or Sony, you make a lot of stuff other than games. You make hardware and other kinds of software. Market strategy for the actual locale, because how you sell a game in China is a lot different from Saudi Arabia or Brazil or Italy or other places. And then the market strategy for the specific game, because not all places play games the same. You know, Japan hardly likes first-person shooters, but they love RPGs. They are crazy about RPGs. And then finally, the changing geopolitical, cultural, social, legal factors, because our world changes dramatically every day, as we all know, if you watch the news. For example, when this happened a couple of years ago, the game industry was frozen they had no idea what to do. They were somewhat paralyzed. So a lot of my clients were like asking me, so what are we supposed to do? We have, this game has Russian content, this game has Ukrainian content. This, you know, we have Russian server farms. We have, you know, players over here. And it was just like, nobody knew what to do. It's like a lot of companies had no strategy for this. They had no contingency plan. So I had to work with them to help them kind of walk through how do you navigate this. And it was not easy because they just they never thought this would be something they had to think about. You know, so within culturalization, there's two types I typically deal with. One is what I call reactive culturalization. So I'm looking for things in the game environment that will trigger a negative response. So like, we want the player to just stay immersed in our experience, right? But sometimes there might be one thing that triggers them that now they're not thinking about your game world, they're thinking about something you did that's making them think about their politics or their faith or something else. So I worked on Fallout 3, and in the environment you had this two-headed Brahmin bull wandering through the landscape. And the Brahmin bull, this is the reason why this game did not ship to India, because the Brahmin bull is sacred in the Hindu faith. And so I told the developer, because you can obviously see it's not just a Brahmin bull, it's mutated, two heads, it's radioactive. So this one issue is the reason it didn't sell in India, because they said it's going to be a big issue, because in India there's actual laws that protect real Brahmin bulls from being harmed. So they felt that those laws might actually be extended to a virtual representation of a bull. So I asked them to swap it out for my poorly photoshopped two-headed horse or something, because any other animal would have worked. A horse would have been fine. But they said, no, we're going to stick with the Brahmin. We're not going to swap it out. We don't think India is an important enough market, which I don't think they would make that decision today. But this was, yeah, they wouldn't. So they want that money. So. Now the other thing that I do is I help companies with what we call proactive culturalization. So this is when we're looking for ways to enhance the experience for a specific market. So I've worked on Temple Run 2, and one of the things I did with them is we created this special skin for Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead holiday in Mexico, because they were seeing an increased interest in users in Mexico. So they said, hey, you know, the holiday's coming up, why don't we do something special because we're seeing so much growth? So they did this special skin, and we basically were very careful about it. We asked local experts, we changed, of course, the ethnicity and the clothing of the characters. We put the proper accessories within the environment. So we put the proper accessories in the environment. And so when we released the sales in Mexico just shot through the roof. People just thought this was amazing. So we actually did another version for India for the Holi holiday, the Festival of Colors, and that also was very successful. So just to give you a few examples of this kind of things that I have to deal with, like one is history. So I've worked on all the Age of Empires games. I'm still working on Age of Empires even now. I've worked on Civilization and Rise of Nations and some other games. And this is a scenario that happened in the first Age of Empires when we had, this is Korea, and this is Korea, that's Japan. And in our history books outside of Korea, it says that in the Middle Ages, Japan invaded the Chosun Empire and almost took it over. So the developer said, that's a great scenario. We're going to put it in the game. You're going to play as the Koreans trying to stop this massive Japanese invasion. So we put it in the game, and the Ministry of Information in South Korea banned the game on day 1. And why did they ban it? Because they said this never happened. In their history books, this never happened. So remember that list of things we have to think about? So this is at a time when Microsoft was trying to grow its games business. It knew from market research that South Korea is a very important gaming market, as it still is. So ultimately, we made a decision only for Korean players to change history. So now the Koreans are invading Japan instead of the other way, which never happened. So that is, obviously that created a big debate on the team about ethics and truth, and that's a good debate to have. If you have to make a decision like that, you should be having open discussions. Should we do this? And what precedent does it set if we make that kind of change? Because you might have other countries coming to you like China and saying, oh, that's great, you're willing to change that? Well, we have a whole list of changes for you. Things like this, using a sacred place in a game. This is from Hitman 2. And they set the action of this sequence inside the Golden Temple in Amritsar, India, which is the center of the Sikh faith. So it's a very sacred place to the Sikhs. And not only did they have the main character in that temple, he was killing Sikhs inside their most sacred place. So the Sikh community was not very happy about this. We have this game, Resident Evil 5. When these images were released and people in the US saw this, there was a massive Twitter storm around this, because we have this nice Caucasian guy shooting these African villagers. And so the developer, they kind of said, we don't understand the controversy. Look, they're zombies, they have to be killed. So what's the big deal? So remember my comment about the context? Remember, this game was made in Japan, 98% ethnic Japanese. So do you expect a typical Japanese developer to understand that racial dynamic that they're showing? And the answer is probably not. It's not part of their experience. It never has been. So now that doesn't excuse them. They should still do their research. But you know, obviously, you know, they can do better. And they did. They made changes after a bunch of comments online. The portrayal of women in games, I can talk about this for a long time. This was a game I worked on where they wanted to sell it in the Middle East. You cannot show versions like this in the Middle East. So I worked with the artist to create these versions on the right, and I said, those look kick-ass, they look awesome, they actually look ready to fight. You know, this is something I would cosplay as, not that. So, and so when they released the game in the Middle East, and I said, so you're gonna use these versions in the West version, right? As even an option, and they said, no, we know our demographics, we're not going to do that. We know what our players want. It's like, well, yeah, but if you do something like this, you might actually get, for example, more women playing your game, and in most markets, women make up 40 to 50% of game players. So you're just leaving a whole mass of money on the floor because you think your players aren't going to like it. Even things like gestures are very complicated. So like I've worked on dancing games where I'm looking at body language and gestures. So like when he's over there dancing, if you saw him doing it in motion, he's doing this, kind of this dance like this, but it almost looks when he speeds up like he's doing this, you know. Now, I think you all know what this means in Italy. The cornuta. So yeah, now Americans have no idea because they'll be like, yeah, rock on, you know, but you know, here it has obviously a not so positive meaning. So, or if you're in Texas, it means hook 'em horns. It means you're a fan of the University of Texas. So context is everything, you know, and even within a country, a gesture can have, you know, multiple meanings. And this, sometimes the issues are very subtle. So if, in Halo, I worked on all the original Halo games, and this character in Halo 2, who was originally called the Dervish, he's called the Arbiter. Now, if you haven't played Halo, let me just set it up for you really quick. So, science fiction game, takes place several centuries in the future. You've got an alien group that came together, they're called the Covenant. They're run by 3 leaders, they're called prophets. And then these prophets are trying to activate these massive halo rings that they don't really understand, but they want to activate them, there's 7 of them in the galaxy, turn them on and basically destroy all sentient life in the galaxy. So it's a weapon of mass destruction. And this is a religious thing they want to do. They call it the Great Path. They're going to go down the Great Path by turning on the halo rings and destroy basically all sentient life. And who's trying to stop them? Well, when they say one of the prophets of truth is called one of the prophets is called the prophet of truth. That's an often used synonym for Muhammad. And so, but I said, you know what? You could argue that that's fine for any religious leader, so I'm going to let that go. The problem is that his original name was Dervish, which is from Sufi Islam. So it's a very specific title. So in the same way that Pope is very specific to Roman Catholicism. So you can't separate them. So we have the Dervish serving the prophet of truth, a quasi-religious group that wants to kill all life in the galaxy, and then who's trying to stop them? A super soldier, Master Chief with an American accent. But it gets better. This is going to be the first major game release after 9/11. So I flagged this and I said, we are creating an allegory inside this game that we do not want people to see. Now the writer Joe Stackney kept saying, no, it's not intentional at all. I don't think it's a big deal. But I'm like, I tested it. I sent this scenario to different colleagues in the Middle East region, all within Microsoft, and I said, read this and let me know if you have any thoughts. And I would say the majority of them basically said something like, I see a revenge fantasy of the United States against Islam. Thank you, that's all I need to know. So we changed this. That's why Dervish became the arbiter in the game and now is the arbiter in all of Halo lore. So sometimes these issues are really subtle and they're really complicated to find. Even things like this, we can get very political when you have a control screen like this where it just says, you know, very innocently, it says country select, has the flag of Taiwan, and it says ROC for Republic of China, which is an alternate name for Taiwan, which is typically what an independent Taiwan wants to call itself. Well, this will get you instantly banned in China because you have the Taiwan flag, you've got ROC, you can't use ROC for Taiwan, but there's an easy way to fix this. So if you just watch, you say country/region, and you say Taiwan, not ROC, because Taiwan's acceptable to both sides. You take the flag out because it's redundant information, you don't need it. And now, ask the question, is Taiwan a country or region? That's not for you to worry about, that's for the user to perceive. So now that perception is on them, and you just kind of slightly tiptoed around this very volatile issue. Then finally, there's about 20% of my work does not involve games at all. I still help a lot of companies with cartographic issues and geopolitical issues. I worked with Google as a vendor, basically a consultant for 6 years to perfect what we call domain tailoring, because you have to show the map a certain way in different parts of the world. For example, this area of northern India called Kashmir is a disputed area, disputed between Pakistan, India, and China. But in India, it's required by law, you must show it as Indian territory. And if you don't, even if it's on a locator map in your game that appears for 3 seconds and then you never see it again in the game, if they see it and if the map is wrong, they'll ban the entire game because of just that one thing. So you have to be very careful about this kind of stuff. And of course, China has their own viewpoint, which, you know, they own this, so they don't like India's viewpoint at all. But that's why it's a dispute. So, so just to close, you know, pretty quickly here, one of the reasons I love working on games, because we are one of the oldest professions in the world. It's one of the oldest activities to humankind. I mean, even back to the earliest writing and the earliest maps back in Babylonia, we made games. It's what we do. And I think it's so natural for us, because if you've been a parent, or even if you're a child, you know what happens. Like, I've been a parent, and you say, okay, let's see how fast you can clean up your room, and if you clean it up in 10 minutes, then you get this reward. That's a game. Or if you're running or you're exercising in the gym, you're saying, if I do it for 5 more minutes, then I'll reward myself with ice cream later. You know, if I don't, then I'm not going to have ice cream. We do it all the time. And so I love that fact. One of the things that also excites me about working in games is that we are on the cutting edge of storytelling. We are changing and redefining how stories get passed from one generation to another. All these other forms of media have come into existence over the millennia, and they're all valid, and we still see them. And you know, I love films, I love all kinds of stuff, but games is where we are actually evolving the medium and how we tell stories. And that to me is very exciting. And I also think it's cool that we are the largest form of entertainment on Earth, because even if you add up all these other forms of entertainment, including live sports, we still make more money, which is staggering to think about. And I regularly tell this to politicians and parents and people, and they're like, that can't be true. It's like, it's been true for over a decade now. So the real thing that I often deal with is what I call this digital battle for mindshare. I'm constantly helping companies, helping creators navigate this battle for mindshare between governments and online factions and others, because we all know about misinformation and disinformation and fake news and all this other stuff. And games now have been elevated to be part of that. And they are seen as a key part of pushing different narratives that will conflict with viewpoints in other parts of the world. And that's something we have to be very mindful of, because if you're working on a game, so okay, we're gonna make this game, we wanna sell in this market, and then we sent it to the market for like the review board, and they came back and said, we want you to change these things. And oftentimes the developer, because they don't know, will say, yeah, okay, fine, we'll change them. Well, then they find out they change them, like for example in South Korea, and then now they're getting yelled at from Japan, because Japan's like, why did you do that? We don't like that. That's not the right point of view, because there's these cultural dynamics that exist in the world, for example, between China, South Korea, and Japan, that is very complex, and it goes back for centuries. So games have become part of this battleground for who defines these global and cultural, global and local narratives. And so I think it's important to be mindful of that, and that's what I do in my job. So the last thing I want to emphasize is that we are creatives, we are artists. We make games as a form of either personal self-expression or collective self-expression. So we should feel that freedom to make anything we want, as long as we realize it's not going to be liked by everybody, as much as we want people to like what we create. And so we have to think about, oftentimes, what I've seen in this industry, we are constantly working between two different goals. One is maximizing your self-expression. That's our pure desire to create. And then the maximizing exposure, because we want everyone to love what we've created. And it's not easy to do that. That's why I call it the fulcrum of compromise, because it's really hard to do both really well. And so oftentimes, there's versions of games that we make. The default version, for example, is a game that has no localization, no culturalization. It's basically the same as painting painting something on canvas and putting it on the wall and saying, that's my art. And people can complain about it. I don't care. It's my art. You can like it or hate it. I don't care. But that's usually not how games work, because we're a business and we actually want to make some money because we want to pay our bills. So we do some kind of, and sorry, the fonts got messed up on here. So we want to do some adaptation. So we might do some localization, because like I tell indie devs in the Western Hemisphere, for example, I said, if you do nothing else, just get somebody to translate at least the UI and some of the instructions into Spanish. You instantly open up pretty much almost the entire Western Hemisphere, minus Brazil. But I mean, that's a huge market, not to mention the fact that in the US alone, it's 30% of people speak Spanish, which is a massive market. And then of course, we also do a culturalized version, this is where you see AAA tends to be over here. They're all about maximizing exposure. So really what you have is more innovation on this side, because you're focusing on the art and self-expression. You have less innovation, but more exposure. And so that's basically, in my view, kind of explains AAA and indie devs, more or less. So that's enough talking from me. But yeah, I'm more than happy to take questions at this point.
Thank you. Amazing talk. I could still be here listening to you speak. We have any question? Don't be shy, please. Oh, yeah, we have many questions, several questions.
Hi. What do you think about the Assassin's Creed Shadows situation?
Oh, that's a great question. Assassin's Creed Shadows. So here's my take on it, because I've been asked this a lot. I like their intention. Their intention is fine, but I do think that Ubisoft grossly missed an opportunity, because the people who are legitimately complaining that this is the first chance to have an Asian protagonist, because they've never had one, first time setting the game series in Japan, I think they would have been better served by having the core character being Japanese. But what I think would have been awesome is that they meet this character, who's the focus, this black samurai character who is real, is from real history. So I think that's cool that they want to highlight a piece of history that people don't know about. But it should not be at the expense of the culture that the whole thing is the focus of. So I think, I mean, they could have even done it where you're playing as the main Japanese character, and then this other character, the Black Samurai, you team up with them. And maybe they help you out. You work together on different parts of the game. I think that would have been great, because now you're still highlighting this character, this real historical figure that people are really not aware of, but you're still keeping the focus on the culture that has not had that exposure. That's how I would have done it. But they didn't ask me, so. They have been a client of mine, but for that particular issue, I was not asked, so.
Okay, other question for the audience? Yes, a couple.
Hi, thank you for the speech. My question is, have you ever had problems with the sounds or registration inside the game?
Yes. In fact, there's an audio issue that became one of the most difficult things I've ever had to deal with. So I was at Microsoft, this is back in the days of I'm going to try and keep this story short because it can be long. But basically, there was a game called Kakeru Chojin. And what it was a hand-to-hand fighting game. It was called Back Alley Brutal, was like the subtitle. And the reason they were pushing this game on the original Xbox, and its highlight is that as you punch each other, you start seeing bruises and cuts, which back then was a big deal. Like, oh my God, the technology can show progressive damage on a person. So, and it's kind of like Street Fighter, but I think it was a few steps above it in terms of the action. So what they did is one of the characters, when you read the character's biography, they play music in the background. So the team used this music that they found, and they said it sounds cool. So they put it in the game. Nobody questioned what it was. And it has lyrics to it, which nobody questioned. It's just like, it sounds cool. So right as the game was starting to ship, there was already 75,000 units packaged and literally rolling on trucks to stores. And that's when someone came to my office and said, hey, somebody said I should play this for you, play the audio file and let me know what you think. So they played it, and I said, well, it sounds like Arabic to me. I don't speak Arabic, but I mean, I'm pretty in tune with different languages. But fortunately, one of my friends, Ahmed, Arabic linguist, was right down the hall, literally right down the hall from me. He's originally from Kurdistan. So I took it down the hall to him. I said, what is this? And he's like, oh, it's this particular part of the Quran. It often gets repeated between other verses. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, where did you find this? And so I told him the context. And as I was still explaining the context, he's like, no. And so I'm like, well, I figured that out myself. But yeah, so I went back to the game team saying, you got to swap this out. You can't do this. And they're like, okay, we'll swap it out. So they did. They found some audio that had no lyrics. But I said, and those 75,000 units, you're going to recall those and destroy them, correct? No. Why would we do that? And I said, well, because they're like, that's expensive. I'm like, you guys throw internal parties that cost more than that. It's not that expensive. So, but they decided in their great wisdom at the time, they said, you know what, we're going to release it only in the US. And of course, I'm a geographer, so I start quoting statistics. And I'm like, you realize at the time, I'm like, there's 10 million Muslims in the United States. Detroit, the city of Detroit is 50% Muslim. I said, and you think we're a homogeneous society? And so they're like, don't worry about it. So they released the game. They released the game in the US. 3 months later, we got a letter from the Saudi Arabian government. Now, the game was not even sent to Saudi Arabia, but somebody basically informed the government, and not just the government, but the religious council of the government. So they sent a letter, as it always did back then, Dear Mr. Gates, because Bill was still running the company at the time. And then they basically were saying, you've offended Islam. And it became front page news in Riyadh, front page news in Dubai, front page news in Cairo. And it started spreading like fire in the region. And it really was starting to get out of hand. So I was asked to go over and help explain, because the head of the Microsoft Middle East region, he's like, we have no idea what's going on. I mean, the products don't get made in the subsidiaries typically. That happens back at headquarters. So all they do is like they're representing the company, and they're the ones who get punished for it though. It's like years earlier when I worked on Encarta Encyclopedia, our general manager of Microsoft Turkey got thrown in jail because we had Kurdistan on the map. And they said, take this off the map or he's not coming out of jail. So we took it off the map. But so anyway, this issue became a massive problem. until finally, so I went over, I got permission, and I went over to Riyadh to basically apologize on behalf of Microsoft in front of the religious council of the Saudi government. This was 2 days after the second Gulf War just started, is when I flew in, so that was kind of chaotic. And I had to sit there in front of this group and basically get bombarded with questions. You know, when we met, they basically did like a little monologue, and he like pointed his finger at me. The first thing he said to me, "I want you to know that we don't hate Americans." I'm like, okay, well, I don't know where this is going. It's like, I didn't even say anything yet. And I think, of course, my brain is going at 1,000 miles an hour, and I'm thinking, yeah, it's probably because at the time there was 100,000 US troops in Saudi Arabia ready to go back into Iraq. So yeah, he's gonna talk up the US. But anyway, he eventually took out this legal pad and he started reading questions. So first question is like, why did Microsoft open its first Middle Eastern office in Israel and not an Arab country? I'm like, I'm not going to answer that. You know, there were two guys from Microsoft on each side of me from the local office. They were whispering in my ear, saying, "Don't answer that. You're only here to talk about the game." So next question: why did Office 97 release in Hebrew before Arabic? Only talking about the game. Next, why did Outlook implement the Judaic calendar before the Islamic calendar? Next question, you know, and so finally so I could tell that this was the very first chance they ever had to speak to somebody from headquarters, so they had all these questions just waiting for probably years, you know, just to fire at somebody. So, yeah, so eventually I apologized and the whole issue kind of went away, but it was a mess. But it was all because nobody asked, what do those lyrics say in the audio file? And it was just, it's crazy to me. And what's even crazier is that a few months later on another game, they almost did the same thing. You know, they just, because I'm like, it was some kind of tantric chanting, and I'm just like, I knew that they knew about this other issue. I'm just like, hello, it's like, do you remember anything that happens here? So anyway, yes, is my answer. Audio can be a problem.
First of all, thank you. Your speech was so interesting and inspirational, I think, for everyone, but I speak for myself.
Thank you.
And at the end of your speech, you said that video games has an actual cultural weight. And my question is how we as people in the industry can make people understand it outside of the industry. Because I speak for Italy, but I think for most of Europe, it's not really clear that video games has a cultural connection and weight, collective and individual.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because I mean, we all face that. I mean, the US, we have our own challenges with the perception of games. I mean, it is changing, and you know, and I used to say this all the time when I ran the IGDA, and I would talk to the media and all that, and I said, effectively, we're looking at a generational change, as it is usually the case, because within another 10 or 15 years, pretty much every politician on earth will have grown up with video games. You know, and so that things will change, and we are even starting to see that, like in state legislatures in the US and other places where they're starting to warm up to the idea of supporting the industry, because they know, because they grew up with it, and they know what it means to be a gamer, what it means to play games. But I think we have to be a cultural ambassador for ourselves. We have to not be afraid to stand up, and I know it's hard, especially somewhere like Italy and in other countries in Europe where there's such a tremendous rich culture of film and art, especially art. I mean, there's so many layers of artistic culture in a place like Italy that I can understand how it feels like you are fighting upstream so hard, you know, because well, that's not high art. I mean, come on, you know, it's like, this is high art. Look at this Renaissance painting. You know, it's like, yeah, but could they make a game? No. So, yeah. Yeah.
It's a beautiful game, visually.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, visually it's a beautiful game. We have problem with game developing, gameplay, or other things, because we don't have the culture to understand our user. But visually, in the game, we have done something beautiful.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, I think part of it is that we need to have an attitude that is not apologetic for what we do. I still meet developers at GDC and Gamescom and elsewhere where sometimes they'll say, well, I'm just a game developer. And I just want to slap them and say, no, you're not just a game developer. Remember what I said, you are changing narrative. You are changing the future of narrative. You are on the cutting edge. Film, they're in the past. They're 100 years ago. I love movies. I love going to movies. I love all of that. Television shows, all of that. I love it, but that doesn't mean they're at the cutting edge of storytelling. So I think we have to be a little bolder in how we assert what we do, or find a different way to frame it. And sometimes we have to use that language and even back it up, which is like I often did when I ran the IGDA, because I kind of had to fight that argument all the time, or I would throw in the economic argument. Say, well, if it isn't culture, then you tell me why games are far surpass film and music and all these other forms of art. Why? Why is that? I mean, obviously it is hitting a certain positive chord with society and with people out there, that they resonate with it. And so how can that not be culture? So were you going to say?
We have time for just 2 questions. I have a couple of anonymous questions here, if you want to answer. One is very, very interesting.
Sure.
What would the career path, or what should show on the CV to work in culturalization of video games?
That's a great question. My career path was kind of weird, because I made up my job. I went into Microsoft as a cartographer to work on a card encyclopedia, which is an old product they had, which they no longer make. But while I was inside the company, I saw that need. I saw the need develop, that they need my skills because they're missing things that they shouldn't be missing. And so I just was bold enough to say, well, I can either leave and just go back to academia, finish my PhD, and figure out what I'm going to do, or I can stay here and kind of fight the fight. And I kind of felt like I want to make things change, because this is such a massive, influential company. I'm confident that if I put in the effort, I can get them to change course a little bit. And that's why I created the geopolitical strategy team within the company. So basically what I'm saying is, first of all, you need to have the background. So everything I do is built on that foundation of geography, which basically gives me a fundamental understanding of how the world works, how cultures work. And what I found with geography that was particularly useful in a business environment is that companies like Microsoft and pretty much any company, they're often thinking about their games in terms of market-to-market sales. And like, how do we sell in that market? How do we sell in this market? How do we maximize sales there, and all that kind of stuff? And that's how geographers think. We basically answer 2 key questions. Where is it, and why is it there? So where is this phenomenon in the world, and why does it exist there but not there? Or why is there a difference between this place and that place? So that way of thinking fit exactly right with a lot of the business decisions being made at Microsoft. So I found very quickly that I could speak their language, and then I would kind of interject my knowledge as best as I could. So that you basically have to start with some kind of foundation. It doesn't have to be geography. It could be sociology or some other field. Some other cultural anthropology is a great field that is similar to what I do. So it could be another field like that. But the key then is you have to find how is your skill and knowledge useful in an environment like that. And sometimes what that means is that you're going to have to get into a company first. Just get a job, whatever it is, QA tester or something. But you have to get into the company. And once you're in the company, then you do what you should do. Like every good virus, you infect them from inside. So once you get inside, it's much easier to try and change things. Because if you came to Microsoft and say, hey, I'm a consultant and I can solve your problems, they're not going to listen. They hear that 10,000 times a day. But if you're an internal employee at a company and you say, hey, I think we can do better with this process, and I have an idea for how to make it better. I'm going to write a proposal, and I'm going to like push it up the chain like I did at Microsoft at different VPs, and see if you can get it approved. And to me, that's really the way you have to make that change happen and kind of test your ability to make change.
Last question, but the guests will stick around a couple of minutes after, so we can make a little bit of networking if you want, and you can ask other questions if you want. And I want to finish with this question because it's really interesting. I really want to work in the gaming industry, but they just never hired me. As a woman that had a nice career in such industry, what do you suggest between pursuing applying or going indie in the free time?
I think the key is to, no matter what path you choose, you have to be constantly developing your skill. That's the key. You have to keep improving your skill set. You can't, just because you apply and apply and apply, maybe you're not getting any success in getting a job at a company, but that doesn't mean you don't keep working on your skill set. I mentor a lot of people who come into this industry, and one of the things I often ask them, I said, so what are you working on? And like, well, in this class I'm doing this, in this class I'm like, no, I don't care about your schoolwork. What are you working on? You said you're an artist, so you should be making art. You said you're a programmer. What are you working on? What are you building? We as creatives, we are compelled to do this work. We can't help ourselves. We want to do this work. I've been doing this culturalization work so long, and I love it so much. I walk into a room and my eyes are scanning for potential sensitivities, like I did when I walked in here tonight, because I can't help it. But I love doing that, and of course I didn't find it yet. But anyway, we are compelled as creatives to do that, So if you feel that, yeah, I want to go in the game industry, I want to be an environmental artist, great. So apply to jobs. If you've already finished school, that's great, but you need to be working on something. That something could be indie. It could be, which is a great way to kind of express those skills. And if it's not doing indie development, it needs to be something else. So even as you're applying for jobs, you need to constantly be reiterating your skill set. And the thing is, especially, what's really key is that, and I'll finish with this, is that one of the biggest problems I see, and I'm going to sound old when I say this, well, I am old, but is that with younger generations I work with, there's such a need to compare to each other. And unfortunately, social media is designed for comparison. We look at what our friends are doing, we see what they're posting on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, we're like, damn, I wish I could draw like that. I wish I could program like that. It's like, if you see somebody like that around you or, on LinkedIn or wherever it might be, it's like, guess what? You may have just found your mentor. So don't be shy. I'm an introvert, believe it or not. I am totally faking extroversion right now. I will go back to my hotel room tonight and curl up in a ball and recover. But over the years, I've learned to fake extroversion because ultimately the mission matters, being able to, do what you need to do. But basically, try as much as you can to seek out mentorship. It's really important. And about comparison, I'll just use one quote from Mark Twain, the American writer, who said, comparison is the death of joy. So just let that sink in. I totally believe that. Comparison is the death of joy. And I think it really is. I know so many friends who spend so much time on social media and they get genuinely depressed because they are looking at what everyone else is doing, not really realizing that most of what you see online is very carefully crafted and framed and perfected. It's not just spontaneous. Hey, look at me. I'm in Lake Como or whatever. So we have to be careful about that. So basically, be heads down, improve what you can do, seek out the help to do it. And that's one thing. The last thing I'll say. I love this industry because we help each other. I've been part of other industries too, and it's just like they are not as collaborative, they are not as open. I love how friendly and welcoming we are, which is part of why the IGDA exists, because oftentimes you meet someone who said, I'm interested in making games. I love games, I'm interested in making games. You're one of us. That's all it takes. Great, come on in, you're one of us. We don't have a test, we don't have any kind of scrutiny, we don't care who you are, we don't care what you look like. It's like you're one of us for that simple reason.
A round of applause, please. Thank you very much, Kate. It's been a wonderful experience, a wonderful talk. Please stick around for a bit. We have a little networking event right now for 1 hour.
I'll say one last thing.
Yeah?
One last thing I was going to say really quick. I'm really easy to find on LinkedIn, so if you want to connect with me, please connect with me. If you have follow-up questions, don't hesitate to ask. I will answer them. It may not be immediate, but I will answer them. So if you have any want to follow up or connect, please do.
Thank you very much.